to Transcending Sport on Wisp Sports Radio, Episode 15. I'm Chris Stafford, and at Wisp Sports we believe that women in sport deserve equal coverage. Transcending Sports tells the stories of women who have given back to sport to help others in different ways, from organisations to campaigns, business to sports administration, charities and media initiatives. My guest today is award-winning sports journalist Evelyn Watta, who began her career as a television intern in her home country of Kenya. She climbed the ladder in a world of male editors, proving herself time and again while setting an example for other women where few opportunities existed. Evelyn overcame sexism and broke the glass ceiling more than once. From intern to editor, she gained recognition in TV and print and taught herself to be an all-in-one photojournalist, producing, presenting and filming coverage of major sports events. In 2008, Evelyn was recognized as the first broadcast journalist to offer real-time video coverage to and in Kenya while reporting from the Beijing Olympic Games. 4 years later, she was to be awarded a media honor for exemplary coverage of the London Olympic Games. And in 2014, Evelyn was named the CNN Africa Sports Journalist of the Year. Beyond the sports desk, Evelyn has led and contributed to numerous mentorship programs for journalists around the world as a way to encourage and support young women into the profession and show what is possible. She has served on media committees for national sports federations and national Olympic committees. In 2007, Evelyn became the first African woman and youngest ever executive committee member of the International Sports Press Association. Having served as Secretary General of the AIPS from 2014 to 2016, she is currently serving as the Vice President and the Coordinator of the Women's Commission. I caught up with Evelyn at the Olympic Channel in Madrid, where she is currently working as a sports producer. Evelyn, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to join you on this show.
Well, I'm excited to have you talk to us and give us a different perspective about women in sport generally, because you have considerable experience in terms of, your journalistic experience coming from Africa, from an African country, but working internationally. Let's start, if we may, with a little bit of background, Evelyn, because it seems that you've been a career journalist from the start.
Yes, I actually finished my college and just jumped into journalism. Obviously, the first time I joined the newsroom, I wasn't very sure where I wanted to be because I didn't know how the newsroom works. But all my life, I'd admired sportscasters. But when I joined a new setup, it was a television company. They didn't have a sports desk. And then 2 months into the station, we decided, I remember it was a colleague whom I had watched as a child, said, why don't you join me on the sports desk? Then we started the sports desk. So it was just like, let's do this. And then that's it. So that's how my first sports desk experience actually started. I think that was in 2000. And I stayed through the sports desk and I worked as a reporter. I moved up to a sub-sports editor, and then eventually I worked as a sports editor. But then as I was working for television, I had it was a very nice experience because being a Kenyan, you cover the best of the athletes. If it's football, you cover very passionate football fans because unfortunately, Kenya doesn't do very well in football. So when it comes to the matches, they're really passionate and sometimes can turn violent. So it was quite I was thrown into the deep end because I had no previous sports reporting experience. And the only experience I had of sports was possibly going to the stadium once or twice with my dad. And most of the times my father would let me stay home because of the violence that was associated with sports in the 80s. So then I moved into writing. I went into a newspaper, and then I moved on and settled into an online sports writing online site. It's called sportsnewsarena.com. and I worked there for about 6 years. And then I moved into sports administration just to be able to get the other side. I still had my journalism going, but I moved into sports administration because I wanted to work with sports writers from different backgrounds. And the AIPS, which is the International Sports Press Association, gave me a platform where I could be able to serve my colleagues from a different perspective. And that was also very exciting because I met people from different backgrounds, people whose challenges were different from what I had experienced, and people who, when they heard of my challenges, they wondered, are we really doing the same thing? So that has been most of it. And now I'm working for the Olympic Channel as a producer.
I'm curious about your childhood, though. When you said there was such violence at football matches in Kenya that you may be not even allowed to go, especially as a girl, I'm sure. What did you do in terms of sport? Were you an athlete at all? Did you have other interests and participate in school sports?
The interesting bit is that I never did any sports because growing up, I had acute asthma, and my father took me to hospital, and my parents were warned against letting me compete in sports or be very active. Then they believed that there was a link between sports, competing in sports, and the asthma attacks. So I actually had this note that every time I had to present it when I have a new teacher, to be exempted from sports. So my interaction with sports started as an adult. Currently, I run and I also box. But these are things that I never did when I was in school. I think I did a bit of swimming in the higher level of school, but that was just because I was forced to do it. And then we have good weather, so you have no excuse of not jumping into the pool because the weather is possibly cold or the water is cold. So I only did it because I was being forced to do it. I would have loved to do it, but then I was also scared because I knew that possibly anytime when I do sports, it triggers my asthma, and I hated the hospital stays. So I kept off sports for that reason. And then the other thing I knew is that every time my parents or the family around me would go to the stadium, they would come back in a rush or in a half because there was violence, because one of the teams that lost, the fans started fighting or something like that. So I also associated sports at a young age with violence. But then later on, growing up watching television, we had some basketball programs, some football programs, and sports looked exciting. Sports looked like the unifying thing. Then I just fell in love with it.
What was it like, or how is it indeed today, for girls and young women to access sports in Kenya?
Honestly, it's really improved over the years. It's not like when we started, when even you practicing sports as a girl, you'll be looked at as if you're a tomboy or possibly you're a failure in class. That's why you're turning into sports because that's how it was viewed then. It was always that the people who do well in class don't engage in sports. Sports is for the people who cannot possibly do well in their exams or master classes. So that has changed over the years. It's improving because now we have sports people, sports women being admired, and you find a girl, a Kenyan girl or a normal African girl actually naming a Kenyan athlete or a Kenyan volleyballer as their heroine. So that has really changed over the years, but it's not been easy. It's been a very long, hard walk for the female sports athletes.
And what about getting into sports journalism then? Because you clearly decided that when you went to school and university, that's what you wanted to do and got the qualifications to do that. So, what is that access and opportunity like for women to get into sports journalism?
Unfortunately, there's no clear path if you want to become a sports journalist. Not only for the women in Kenya, but I think generally in our journalism, because I don't know whether this has changed in mainstream newsroom, but then I think it's still the same. The niche or the best part of journalism is when you're doing the news. So for people doing the lower cadre of news, which is sports, or maybe sometimes entertainment, not even entertainment, sports actually, because in most, if you look at the paper, it's on the end, it's the last part of the paper. If you look at a news bulletin, sports comes at the end. So at the tail end is people who possibly who cannot manage to master the top stories, follow the politicians. So, like when we had interns coming into the newsroom, and the one who was not very strong will be sent to the sports desk because that's where people can play around with news or play around with stories. So there's still no clear path for someone wanting to become a sports journalist per se in Kenya. All you need to do is have the passion, and that passion is what carried people through. And then the other thing that's still lacking, we don't even have mentors. We didn't, like, during my time, I didn't have anyone to hold my hand and say, look, if you want to become a sports journalist, this is how you go about it, or this is what you need. No one tells you anything. Now it's changing because we have associations, we have forums where we try to integrate young journalists or young students who are interested in sports writing into the system. So we try to just show them the ropes and tell them, this is how you go about it, or this is what you want to do, or this is what you need to focus in your journalistic experience if you want to end up in sports reporting or sports writing. So for now, it's really improved. But then when we started, nothing. It was just your passion. If you're good in sports, or you have a good voice, or you have a mastery of sports, then you can be a sports journalist.
Well, you clearly created your own opportunities, Evelyn, with that first job to develop an opportunity there for a sports desk. How were women regarded in the workplace and certainly in sports? Because we so often find women are marginalized, and even globally, there are not the opportunities and the opportunities for progression and senior positions in sports journalism. Often the sports desks are run by men. So, how are women regarded as, and what has been your experiences with the different jobs that you've had toward women on the sports desk?
It's improving, but we still have a lot of work to do, Chris, because I remember my first experiences in sports. They were quite horrifying, to be honest, because the first time I remember I went to a very big football match, it was like the Kenyan Derby. And unfortunately, the setup of the stadium, there's no clear press tribune or media area. So what we used to do then, we would sit just by the pitch line. And I remember one time someone summoned me. I think it's one of the guys or one of the organizers or one of the fans, and they actually asked me to leave the pitch line. But that's where everyone else was seated. And I wondered why. That's where all my other colleagues said, and they said, look, it's bad luck to have a woman sitting so close to men on such a big day. I said, look, I'm a journalist. The other guys, I said, they're men, because I was the only female sports journalist there. And he didn't seem to have a problem with the others, but it was just me. And for that, at that time, I was associated with bad luck. So if his team lost, they would actually say there was that woman sitting very close to the pitch line, and maybe she distracted the players, or it's a taboo to have a woman sitting so close to the players. So I had to leave. But it was a heated exchange, but then I left. And then the other difficult thing was actually with the administrators. The sports administrators will actually just brush you off. You want to interview someone, and someone will clearly tell you that, why don't you have a cup of coffee and talk about this? I say, no, I need to come into your office and do an interview with you because I'm coming with my television cameraman or my colleague. And he says, but first we need to meet. We need to meet. I say, why do we need to meet? Then, there are always excuses to meet outside the office for me. I think with the sports administrators, they never took me seriously. And I remember even at a press conference, you'd have someone, maybe you're asking questions, and they'd say, okay, there's a journalist from the Nation. And then there's this girl from the Nation. So the other people are journalists, but then there's this girl who also wants to ask a question. And I remember taking offense at some point, and I asked the person, I'm also a journalist. Besides being a girl or a woman, I'm also a journalist. I don't mind you referring to me as a journalist. Why is it that every time I ask you a question, you always first refer to my gender and not to my profession, like you do with the male colleagues? So there's always there's always some bias when it came to me. But then somehow the athletes made it very easy, because even the footballers or whatever it is, if they're the male sports athletes, they would also, I think for them it was just weird or just funny that they have this girl asking them about very manly things, and so they're excited about it. So they would really help me and make it easy for me, and they will give me exclusive pieces. But then the administrators and even fellow colleagues or the fans, they found it very hard to have this woman just coming into what was a male-dominated area. Chris.
Yes, this seems to be so common, though, doesn't it, globally? And though it is changing very gradually, there's still the stigma around female sports journalists or female journalists. But you certainly broke through all of that in some considerable way with the recognition that you have achieved over time with the awards and your involvement in the sport globally. And I'm looking now at your awards and recognitions and the things that you've achieved by being the first broadcast journalist to offer real-time video coverage to and in Kenya at the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games. So that in itself is recognition as a journalist, obviously. Was that coming from men who were recognizing this, or how did that come about?
That actually came about, it came from my bosses who are all men, because I remember going to Beijing. Even convincing my own boss to let me go to the Olympics was, I can call it one of the biggest tasks I've ever had to do in my life. He didn't believe that I could go. He didn't believe that, no, first of all, he didn't believe that I could go to the games and deliver. And I was a journalist. I was just a reporter and a journalist. I'd never really had a hand on camera work. So I had to do a crash camera work course for the Olympics.
Well done.
2 weeks, yeah, 2 weeks crazy crash camera, because they said, okay, if you're going, you cannot go with a cameraman. You will be the cameraman and you'll be the journalist and you'll be your own producer. I'd never done an assignment like this. So I ended up doing it. And the most amazing thing is that we had to send material back home. I remember that time we were using a very archaic, an old system called Beacon. So you set up the Beacon, you try and record your own interviews, you edit and send home a package. So the first time that happened, they said, it actually did work. Okay. So the following day they helped me and just guided me through the duration of my stay in Beijing for the Olympics. And when I came back, they said, look, you've actually shown us that this is how we can cover other assignments. We don't need to send a journalist, a cameraman, and a producer to any assignment. One person can go and do it. So you're actually the pioneer in this. And I remember sitting down for the first time with the chief executive officer of the company, and he bought me lunch and he said, what else can we do? How else can we improve from your experience? I said, the only thing we need to do is to give the same budget to the sports desk as you do to the political desk, because for me, there was no cameraman to accompany me to the Olympics. But when there's a big campaign, they hire choppers or they hire a cameraman. They can pay for a cameraman, pay for the reporter to come and cover, for instance, even the American elections. But for Evelyn, who's going to cover this Beijing Olympics, no. You have to show us why we have to spend on you. So that was the only thing that I told him, that we need to have a budget for sports, because sports is big. It's as big as the American elections. It's as big as the Kenyan elections, and especially the Olympics. So it was quite an unusual experience for me. It was baptism by fire, but I'm glad, because the whole experience kind of shaped the Kenyan experience, or the Kenyan way of covering international events.
Well, it certainly did give you the recognition, and then 4 years later in London, you were awarded another media honour for exemplary coverage of the game. So obviously the Beijing experience helped you in London as well. What was your role in London?
In London, I was writing for a sports website, and I remember that it was there'd never been a female sports journalist who had gone out and written and actually sent back reports from an international event. So everyone was watching to see how I was going to do this. And what I managed to do was to get exclusive pieces with the athletes, because yes, we had other colleagues there, but they were all male, and there'd never been a female sports journalist out there doing the same kind of work. So when I went there and did it, and especially then, I think Kenyans were slowly embracing the online platforms. So this was really, it was also something that had never been done. But they were really impressed that it was on time because unlike the papers, they didn't have to wait for tomorrow for the paper to be produced. They could just log into the site and check the results or check the reactions from London based on what I was sending back home.
And then 2 years later, you were recognized by CNN as their Africa Sports Journalist of the Year. So these obviously are very notable recognitions and awards, Evelyn. What does that mean to you to be recognized by your peers?
I think for me, every award or every recognition just it tells my story and tells my journey, and it sometimes I feel like it puts pressure on me to also just step my game. I have to keep doing better because now I know a lot more people are watching and a lot more people want to see why I'm being recognized or why I'm being awarded or what is it that you have that makes you so good. So for me it's just a pressure, it's some sort of pressure, but it's also a motivation for the young sport journalists from Kenya or from any other part of Africa or even any other part of the world who's coming up and wanting to become a sports writer or a sports broadcaster, but they're scared of doing it. I came from nowhere. I was not the best. I was not, I never imagined that I would be one day recognized for anything in the line of sports because I was not a sports person per se. So for me, every award, every recognition is a motivation. I know someone else is watching and someone else says, if Evelyn did it, I can do it. Or someone else is seeing and saying, okay, let me try. Maybe I could be recognized sometime. Because I've not had an easy journey. It's not been easy. It's not been what I hoped it would be. Because sports journalism is not for the faint-hearted, especially where I come from. It's not so easy because you don't get the budgets, you don't get to travel as much as your other colleagues travel. So it's for me, it's every time I do something and someone pats me on the back, I say, okay, this is a reason to stay on and keep on keeping on.
Well, clearly you've become a role model and you enjoy the mentoring programs too, that you're involved with so many. What is it that appeals to you about that? You seem to have thrown a lot of energy and time into that part of your life now. And clearly, as I say, being a role model for young girls coming into the sport and coming into sport and in the world of sports journalism. So talk a little bit about how you got into your mentoring role, if you will, and and what this means to you, and if you've seen some sort of reaction from maybe a groundswell of young women coming into the sport as a result of this.
I actually got involved with it through the International Sports Press Association. And as I mentioned before, I myself didn't have a chance or didn't have any mentor until later on in my career. And I always look back and say, I wish I had someone to guide me through the ropes then when I started my career. Possibly, I don't know, I could have been better off. The journey would have been much easier than it was. So when this chance came through the AIPS, that's the International Sports Press Association, I jumped on it. And I remember I was the youngest of the mentors that called on board for the program. The first time they started the program, I think it was at the World Universiade in China. And when I went there, it was very refreshing because here are young journalists, some of them students, who are experiencing things that I went through years back when I started my career. But now they had someone to ask the question, they had someone to share their fears, or just ask someone to look at the script without judging them or deleting it because they've done the wrong thing. Actually, just walk with them through the journey and tell them what to expect in sports journalism because as it is, even now, very few African universities even have a course tailor made for sports journalism. So it's actually a very gray area in most countries. So it was quite rewarding to meet people who already have been through a sports journalism class. Most of them are from Europe or from Asia, and then meet another class of young reporters who had never been, who had never experienced sports journalism. The only thing that was keeping them or igniting their passion into to become sports journalists was maybe their passion for sports. So this was quite a very nice. It's been a very nice thing for me to do. I've been involved with a number of other programs through the AIPS, which entirely means just meeting a group of young reporters, and maybe if it's through the Universiade or through UEFA championships, mainly the AIPS looks at events that are not very high pressured in terms of journalistic call. So the under 21 programs, the under 21 tournament, sorry, the Universiade, the Special Olympics are the perfect places to be able to conduct such a thing, because it's a big event, it's a big championships in terms of being possibly a multi games event, and it gives you the experience of what sports journalism is in terms of at the Olympics or at a bigger football championships or at a track and field event, but on a lower pressure zone. So you have a chance to sit with the young reporters from different countries or young students who are coming into sports journalism, sit with them, guide them through the ropes, possibly through online writing, broadcast journalism, and just work with them. And even after the programs, what we do is we try to maintain touch. So you become like a pen pal, sometimes. But now with the Facebook and Twitter, you are more in touch with these people because you follow their journeys as they begin. And I think it's a very rewarding program, and it's something that's been a very big thing for the AIPS, because we've had some journalists who started from nothing and now they're at the top of their careers in their countries or elsewhere in the world. Chris?
Wonderful programs, clearly, all of the work that you're doing. I'm curious as to whether you've seen a changing attitude now towards young women coming into the profession and towards you.
Certainly, there is. And even I remember when I won the CNN awards, I think the lady who presented the award, I can't remember her name, but she was from CNN, and she said, "This is the first time in the history of this award that we are actually rewarding a female sports journalist for the CNN Sports Award of the Year." So I think I broke the ceiling. So now there's no reason why another woman cannot be able to win it. And I believe it's all because once one person does it, the others are motivated to, because most of the times what holds us back is a fear and just the disbelief, and just you lack the courage and the motivation, because you feel like this is something for the man. This is something that needs some testosterone. So I don't have what it takes to get this award or to become the best. So I think sometimes it's just the fear that holds us back, the fear of failing. But I always say, go ahead, fail, and then you'll say, I tried and failed. But don't sit back and not do it, because then you never know your capabilities.
Well, as we hear, you're either winning or learning. There is no such thing as losing.
No, for me there isn't, because if I lose, at least I took part in the run or in the game, and I played, because we are all the same. We are all at the same level. We played the 90 minutes, but there was only one win on that day. But it doesn't make me a sore loser.
Absolutely not, of course. And your work, of course, with the AIPS, with AIPS, is ongoing. You are now going to be vice president for another term, right through to 2022. But you're also the coordinator of the AIPS Women's Commission. Talk about the work that you're doing on that.
I think let me first just talk a bit about the vice presidency. This is something that I'm only serving my first year as a vice president. And this was also something that was huge for me, because coming into AIPS, even I served as a member before. It was a big thing to have an African woman sitting on the board of AIPS. And eventually, when I was elected into the vice presidency, I'd had some fights, let me call them that, because I've always believed that the way the AIPS was set up was not very much pro women, because normally during our congresses, what we used to do is to offer one room per country for two delegates. But then when I first attended the AIPS Congress, I had to go with a male colleague. But then the invite clearly states that every country will get one room, one double room for the duration of the Congress. But here I am traveling with a male colleague, and we only have one room. And this is something that I had to work very hard, and I fought and I said it has to change. Because this, first of all, it discourages even the other women from other countries to want to come to the Congress, because when they see this line, they say, no, okay, I can't go because it's a man going. And in most cases, you'll never have two women traveling to represent a country at the AIPS Congress. It's normal to have the men. So the first thing that we had to do is to change this, because it was something that was done when sports journalism was like more of an all men's club. So this had to change. And when it changed for me, this was a big win, because then we had more women attending the Congress. Then now the thing that I've been trying to push for is to have more women on the board, because when you have more women at the top, then you are able to even implement more things that are pro women. For instance, even with the Women's Commission, the difficulties with the Women's Commission is sometimes is even finding a quorum from the people who are attending the Congress to make up a quorum for the Women's Commission. So the first thing that we are still working on, we're not there yet, but we are not where we were, for instance, 10 years ago, is to try and improve the attendance of the women coming to the Congress. Then once we have the right number of women coming to the Congress, you can be able to have the right representation at the Women's Commission. I remember 2 years ago when we were at a Congress and I brought this up for discussion, and some people felt that possibly what we needed to do was to introduce quotas. I said, we don't need quotas because I didn't come into the board through a quota. I was elected based on merit, based on what my colleagues had seen. But then when you have quotas, you also don't get the quality you want. And quotas only work for people who cannot change. But we have shown over the years in AIPS that AIPS is willing to change. So the only thing that we need to do is to have more women attending the Congress, and then more countries nominating women for posts on the board. Because when you only have 5 women coming to the Congress, then you'll only have possibly, very good shot, will have 1 or 2 women being nominated to the board. You can't have all the 5 women. But when you have 20 women coming to the Congress, then there's a chance that there will be 5 countries nominating women for positions on the board. So this is still work in progress, as is. We are only 2 women on the board. There's me and there's a colleague from Hungary. And even in my previous term as an executive committee member, we were only 2. There was a vice president from Lithuania and myself, Kenya. And when I was elected, I became the first African woman to ever become vice president of the AIPS. Good, but then it's not good enough, because I believe there have been other better female journalists from Africa. Possibly they never got the chance to come to the Congress, and they were never nominated by their countries. So even with the Women's Commission, it's been slowly taking shape. But what we want to do is to be able to have a forum within the AIPS, which is within the journalistic port called AIPS, to be able to shape, have just like a code of what we need to do and what we need to do for women across the world to help them, or maybe to have more forums, to have more women attending even top sporting events. Because I will tell you, for an African woman, an African sports journalist, to come to maybe the Olympics, for most of them it's very difficult, because the Olympics, the way it is, like in Africa, it's a preserve of the sports editors. And most sports editors are men. So you see that you'll never have the numbers of African sports women attending it by virtue of being a sports editor. So these are the things we need to look at. Just having more, maybe sending more women to FIFA Women's World Cup, or just mentoring more women into the profession, and even giving them a platform to be able to share their journeys, because some of us are still experiencing very difficult journeys in their journalistic fields. Like some of them are still going through very high level harassment. So they need a place where they can be able to share this, and we can find a way of how to overcome this.
Well, you clearly have broken the glass ceiling, Evelyn, and you're showing young girls what they can be now and wonderful opportunities that there are available to them. But there's still hurdles to overcome. As you mentioned, there's still harassment. I'm sure there's sexism. What message would you finally like to give to young girls about the work that you're doing and the work you're looking forward to doing in the future with the obviously important roles that you have now?
I think for the first thing, even before looking at the journalism itself, I think the first thing we have to do is to get more women on the sports pages, get more women on our shows. If it's, for instance, if you have a radio show or you have a television program, we need to get more women athletes then at that level, because I believe we still don't have the high number of women in terms of shining, especially from Africa. We still don't get the women, being having the best features written about the women athletes uh, where we come from. So we need to get more of the women on the sports pages, because I believe the female athletes, like if you look at Kenya, for instance, the track and field, women have been performing better in the Olympics and in all the other championships. But who knows this? We only know it because we don't know it because the only time the men get the coverage is because they lose. People get angry when the men lose, but no one bothers really when the women's team or a women athlete loses our races. For instance, in Kenya, we don't get as angry as we should when the results don't go our way for the women athletes. So this is a first thing. When you have the pages filled with more women's stories, then it will only be natural to have more women coming in to cover and tell these beautiful stories without using the sexism titles that we've been using. Like I remember I had an editor who would say, who would ask the photographer, can you give me one nice photo of a volleyballer because I need to color my page? Not because of what the lady has achieved, no, because the page is too manly and it's too boring. So we don't want that. So first thing we need to do is to change the content of the sports, to try and have the 50-50, or even if it's 60-40 content in terms of women sports. And then we can have the women sports writers encouraged, to come in and cover the women that are shining and tell a different story, tell it in a different way. Because I believe that anytime you read as a report, for instance, written by a woman on a woman athlete or a woman sports star, it's different. You will not ask them about you look beautiful, or how do you do this? How do you manage to be away from your family to stay in the camp for this long? No. You ask them based on what they have been able to achieve and not looking at their gender.
Absolutely. This really is a global issue, Evelyn. It's interesting to get your perspective though, and I'm curious now, if you look back on your career and the actual work you're doing as a journalist, what do you most enjoy and have you most enjoyed about it?
There's so much to enjoy about sports. I always tell people that how many people get paid to watch the Olympics? We are lucky that this is what we get paid to do. So there's so much, but I think one of the greatest moments is when I watched one of the Kenyan athletes, David Rudisha, break the world record at the Olympics. That is over the 800 meters. That was big. It was, I think, the best ever performance. And I remember uh, the stadium stood and everyone just couldn't believe what they watched. So for me, to date, that still stands as the best moment in my international experience. But then looking at being a bit sexist here, I think when the Kenyan women's football team qualified for the African Cup of Nations was a big thing, because it's something that the male team has not been able to achieve over the last over a decade. And here are some women who didn't even get the same budget in terms of what the male team gets, the male football team gets, and they go ahead and qualify, beating against the odds, and they go and represent the country at the African Cup of Nations. And for the first time, I actually saw it was a headline story on the page one of the papers, and not a sports paper, a national paper. So that for me was it was a big thing because I said, look, we're getting there. And, the women are showing that they don't need to lose to be on the headlines. They can also win and grab the headlines.
Well, finally, then, before I let you go, Evelyn, tell us what you're looking forward to this year. What are the big sporting events you'll be covering?
I'll just say what I'm looking forward to this year. I'd like to see how the wild, first of all, I focus more on track and field. So certainly the Wild Indoor Championships is something that I'll be looking forward to a lot. That will be in Birmingham next month. And then we also have the African Athletics Championships, which is coming up later in the year. That should be exciting as well because that's where the young journalists, the aspiring and the upcoming athletes from Africa. That's where they can go and be able to showcase what they have to show. And the Winter Olympics, I've been watching the Nigerian team, and this by far has been the best games in terms of African representation at a Winter Olympic Games. So to have a Kenyan there, to have a lady from Togo, Mauritius, Eritrea, and to have the biggest ever contingent from Nigeria, that is something good. And most of them are competing for the first time. So I believe that that's something it's going to spur the interest of Africans or the non-winter sports nations to the next Olympics. So certainly Beijing, the upcoming games in Beijing will be something Africans will be watching and really following and hoping to qualify. Because once we've had the countries that have been able to make it to Pyeongchang, they can only get better. And I believe we'll have a lot more winter sports athletes from Africa. And maybe one time, we never know, we could have a medalist. And maybe, the way I'm saying it, it could be as soon as Beijing. So the winter sport is something I've been following closely, especially because of the African representation. And unfortunately, I'm skewed towards the Nigeria women's bobsled team because how they managed to get there is just amazing.
Yes, a fabulous story and lots to look forward to, clearly. Exciting times ahead. Things are changing, and you're making a wonderful contribution, both in terms of coverage of African women's sports and as a journalist and a role model and mentor for young girls coming into this career. So thank you very much for taking the time to come on the program, Evelyn, and share your story and your perspective, and the very best of luck with all the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Chris, and looking forward to working with you in this journey because we need more people. We can't do it alone.
That's so true. Well, thank you so much and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to find out more about the AIPS, there'll be a link in our show notes accompanying this episode. That's, of course, at wispsports.com, where you'll also find many more conversations from the world of women's sports, including blogs, articles, and almost 780 episodes of the podcast. There is something for everyone who's interested in women in sport. And, of course, if you prefer to listen to podcasts on your podcast player, just look for Wisp Sports Radio and subscribe to us there. And if you'd like to join in the conversations that we have here at Wisp Sports at any time, just drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. You can also join in the conversation, of course, on our social media channels by following, sharing and commenting on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Just look for Wisp Sports. Until the next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.